The orientation packet for Valdoris Institute of Xenobotany described the Null-Light bays on sub-level 4 as theoretical infrastructure pending future research potential. What that meant, as discovered on my first morning, was that they were locked. Senior Cultivator Resvan held the key on a chain around one of his 3 necks. He was tall, pale green, and faintly luminescent in the way that all Chorathi were. Their skin absorbed ambient light and re-emitted it at a slightly different frequency, which was beautiful, and also, as I would come to understand, the reason they had built an entire civilization's agricultural science around the assumption that light was the only precondition for growth. He stood at the front of the intake seminar with his key in plain sight and told us, the patience of someone explaining arithmetic to a slow child, that nothing had ever germinated in null-light conditions at this institute. The lower bays exist, he said, as a monument to the question, not the answer. You will conduct your practicals in the upper bays, where the spectrum arrays are calibrated and the growth medium is prepared. There were 9 of us in the intake cohort, 8 Chorathi postgraduates and me. The Chorathi took notes. I looked at the key. I had come to Valdoris on an exchange posting from the University of Agricultural Sciences in Nairobi. My specialty was closed system cultivation. Food production in environments with no natural light, no reliable water cycle, and compromised atmospheric composition. I had spent 2 years before the posting working in a repurposed mineshaft in northern Finland, growing leafy greens for a polar research station that had lost its surface access for 8 months out of every 12. I did not mention this in my intake interview. The question had not come up. The upper bays were impressive. 3 levels of tiered growing platforms, each one bathed in precisely modulated spectrum light from arrays that Resvan referred to as the heart of the institute. The growth medium was a pale silver substrate that the Chorathi had engineered over 4 centuries to maximize photon to chlorophyll conversion. The alien cadets moved through it the way you move through a room you grew up in. Familiar, confident, already knowing where everything was. I spent my first afternoon in the upper bays taking notes and asking no questions. I was watching how the system worked, what inputs it required, what it could not function without, what would happen to the yield curves if you pulled the spectrum arrays offline. The answer to the last question was obvious. Everything would die. The entire pedagogical framework of Valdoris Institute was a single point of failure, and the faculty had named that failure theoretical and locked it in the basement. That evening, I filed a materials request through the Institute's supply system. Requested 1 sealed cultivation bay on sub-level 4, citing the exchange student access clause in the Institute charter, Resvan had not mentioned, but which was in the packet. A 12-liter container of organic decomposition slurry from the Institute's waste sassing unit, 2 thermal coils rated for low and steady heat output, a humidity regulator, and a bag of vermiculite. The supply system flagged the slurry request as unusual. I added a note explaining that it was a closed system soil amendment. The system approved it overnight. The key was a different matter. I did not ask Resvan for it. The exchange student access clause gave me the right to request a bay. It did not specify that the senior cultivator had to unlock it personally. I took the clause to the Institute's registrar, a small harried Chorathi named Veltos, who managed the facility's administrative systems and clearly wished he managed something else. He read the clause twice, looked at my materials list, after a long pause that I had learned to recognize as the universal administrative expression of, "This is technically allowed, but I wish it weren't," cut me a secondary key. I went down to sub-level 4 at 6 in the evening. The corridor smelled of recycled air and old metal. The bay I'd been allocated was 4 meters by 3, with bare composite walls and a floor drain. No light fixtures. The environmental system was functional. Temperature, atmosphere, humidity, all registerable and adjustable. But the spectrum arrays had never been installed. There were mounting brackets on the ceiling where they would have gone. I set the thermal coils at 31 degrees Celsius. I mixed the decomposition slurry with the vermiculite at a ratio I had worked out in Finland. 2 parts slurry to 3 parts vermiculite, with enough moisture to clump but not pool. I seeded it with a mixed culture of mycorrhizal fungi I had brought in a sealed carry case from Nairobi, which had cleared customs at Valdoris without comment. Because no one at Valdoris Customs had a category for mycorrhizal fungi, I set the humidity regulator to 68% and left. I came back the next morning to check temperature gradients and adjust the moisture content slightly. I came back the morning after that to see the first thread-thin white filaments extending across the surface of the medium, mycelium, exactly on schedule. On the third morning, I transplanted the first seedlings earth spinach because spinach is aggressively indifferent to light levels and will grow in conditions that would stop almost anything else. The leaves were pale, the stems etiolated, and the plants had the particular look of something that knows its situation is not ideal and has decided to produce anyway. I found this relatable. The cohort's practical examination was on the morning of day 9. Res Von had designed it as a spectrum optimization exercise. Each cadet was assigned a section of the upper bays and tasked with adjusting the array calibration to maximize yield in a novel growth medium he had introduced 2 days prior. The Chorathi cadets had been preparing for this. They had memorized the absorption curves of the new medium and had strong opinions about the optimal frequency adjustments. I had submitted my exam application with a different location, sublevel 4, Bay 7. Resvon read the application 3 times. I know this because Veltos told me later that the Senior Cultivator had come to the administrative office to confirm the exchange access clause was genuine and had stood in the doorway for a long moment before walking away without saying anything. He brought the cohort down at 9 in the morning. All 8 Chorathi cadets plus Resvon himself, standing in the sublevel 4 corridor under the recycled air fluorescence. I unlocked Bay 7 and opened the door. The smell reached them before anything else. Damp earth and something green and faintly sweet. The smell of active biological processes in a sealed system, which is a different smell from the clean, precise output of the upper bays. One of the Chorathi cadets took a step back. Another made a sound that the translation system rendered as organic contamination, which was technically accurate. I turned the bay's work lights on. Not spectrum arrays. There were none. Just the flat utility lighting I'd rigged from the corridor fixtures on day 1. The growing medium covered the full bay floor. The mycelium network was visible at the edges, white against the dark slurry and vermiculite substrate. Spinach seedlings stood in uneven rows, pale, practical, alive. In the far corner, a second culture was already producing mushroom pins, small brown caps pushing up through the surface in a cluster. Resvon stood in the doorway and did not speak for a long time. His bioluminescence, which I had noticed fluctuated when he was processing something unexpected, dimmed slightly and then stabilized. "There is no light source," he said. "No," I agreed. "The growth medium is," he stopped. He was looking at the mushrooms. "Decomposition fed," I said. "The fungi break down the organic material in the slurry. The spinach roots into the mycelium network and takes what it needs from the substrate. The system generates its own heat as a byproduct of decomposition, which is why the thermal coils are set low. I'm mostly just maintaining an existing process rather than driving it." One of the Chorathi cadets had taken out her notation device. She was writing. I recognized the look. It was the same look I'd had on my first day in the upper bays, watching a system that was unfamiliar and trying to understand the rules. Res Von was quiet for another moment. He pulled out his classification tablet, a slim thing he carried on his belt, which I had seen him use twice before to record formal academic notations, and made an entry. He did not tell me what he wrote. He stepped back from the doorway, looked at the bay for a long moment with his 3-necked silhouette framed against the corridor light, and then looked at me. "The practical examination," he said, "will need a second rubric." He handed the new key to Veltos to copy before we went back upstairs. I stayed to water the spinach. It didn't need much. The system was mostly managing itself by then, the way good systems do when you set them up right and then get out of their way. That was something Finland had taught me, and before Finland, a mine shaft in Wales. And before that, a hydroponic basement in Nairobi, where my mother had grown tomatoes, under a single 40-watt bulb during the rolling blackouts of my childhood. We had always grown things in the dark. We just hadn't told anyone.